So in your opinion, all of the little bit of infrastructure that was actually in the stimulus package that went to certain states for stupid projects, I mean, most of them, nobody ever even heard of some of the bridges that got fixed. Would you say that's unconstitutional just based on that?
Well, I mean, if we want to be extremely strict constructionists like Jefferson, I would. I mean, because that certainly was Jefferson's view. I mean, he thought a lot of these projects might be valuable, but you'd have to amend the Constitution first to allow it. I mean, the worst fear Jefferson had was that people would say, I'd love to do X, Y, and Z, and it's not in the Constitution, but it would be too much trouble to amend it, so let's just go ahead and do it anyway. He says, well, then, in that case, we might as well just have a blank piece of paper for a Constitution, if that's what you're going to do.
So, yes, you do agree that the stimulus package, at least in some parts, oversteps its boundaries, yes?
Oh, yeah, I mean, and again, even there, I think most of the people who supported it in the government did not have some well-thought-out economic Keynesian rationale for it. They just thought, hey, here's an opportunity to shovel money to my district, so I'm going to take it.
Gotcha. Okay, let's go to number 2. What's the other clauses that get argued so much?
Oh, this is my favorite one, the Commerce Clause, that the federal government can regulate interstate commerce. Well, because it says that in the Constitution, the federal government, therefore, now tries to define all of life so that it all somehow amounts to interstate commerce so they can regulate it. So my favorite example is in the early 40s, there was a farmer who went to court saying the federal government does not have the power to regulate wheat that he grows on his own farm for his own consumption. They don't have the right to tell him how much he can grow. He says, look, I'm not engaged in interstate commerce. You can't regulate me. I'm growing the wheat, I'm consuming it myself, and I'm feeding it to my livestock. In what way is that interstate commerce? And the answer they gave him was, well, what would have happened if you didn't grow that wheat on your own farm? You might have bought it from another state. You might have engaged in interstate commerce. So by abstaining from interstate commerce and just growing the wheat yourself, you've indirectly affected interstate commerce. I mean, you've got to be kidding me. Right?
Well, that was actually a similar argument that they cited for the marijuana case in California, right? Because they were consuming it right there, they were growing it right there, but they said, hey, if you weren't growing it here, you'd be getting it from somewhere else, right?
Exactly, and so you're indirectly influencing the interstate market for marijuana, an illegal market, by the way. So the whole thing's absurd.
All right, so the last one?
The last one is that the federal government shall have all powers that are necessary and proper to carry into effect the enumerated powers. So in other words, the federal government has the power to build buildings, then by implication it has the power to purchase lumber. That's what that means. But in social studies class, we learned that this is an elastic clause that allows the federal government pretty much a very, very broad leeway to do whatever it wants. Nobody would have accepted an elastic clause. I mean, the very idea was rejected at the convention. All it means is, just as I said, that if something is extremely obviously necessary to carry out the federal government's powers, then it has that power. But Alexander Hamilton even said that the Constitution would be exactly the same if there never had been a necessary and proper clause. He actually said if we obliterated that clause, it would not affect the Constitution in any way. It's merely a clarifying statement. And yet this clarifying statement becomes this gigantic loophole into which everything gets rammed.
Okay, for those that argue that nullification itself is unconstitutional, what do you have to say to them?
Well, I would remind them of the Virginia Ratifying Convention, that this was the understanding that the ratifiers had when they joined the Union. I would remind them that James Madison, the father of the Constitution, said in 1798 that the states are, quote, duty-bound to resist if the federal government goes beyond its legitimate powers. And then finally, just from a common sense point of view, nobody would ever enter into a contract and say that the other party gets to interpret the terms, but I don't. No, always both parties interpret the terms.
Okay, so are you in favor of the Tea Partiers? Do you feel like they're in support of nullification and bringing more power back to the states?
I think by and large, I think a lot of them don't entirely know where they stand other than the fact they feel totally betrayed and disillusioned by everybody. And that's a pretty good start because that is the feeling you should have. I don't think a lot of them have heard this idea yet, but whenever it is presented to them, they seem to say, well, it makes sense to me. We've tried everything else, and it's been a big stinking failure.
Okay.
Might as well listen to Thomas Jefferson and give him a try.
All right, well, one quick question left. You offer up a solution I found interesting. What if the states put the taxes in escrow accounts and only push that money off that was due to the federal government theirs? Yes, did I get that right?
Yeah, this is being proposed again in Washington and a few other places.
And it's working?
Yeah, the idea of so-called federal tax escrow accounts where the states just, let's say the federal gas tax that they help collect, they hold it back.
Okay.
And if the federal government tries to threaten them, if you don't obey this or that dictate, we'll yank your highway money. The states can say, all right, well, we're not giving you the gas money. So
gotcha.
There.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us again. Thomas Wood's book is Nullification: How to Resist Federal Tyranny in the 21st Century. Thomas, thank you so much for being here on The Political Tick.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.